Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live session on brand protection and brand building. I would like to introduce Mr. Vikas Ranka, who is the founder and CEO of Aquis Technologies. Vikas has vast experience of more than 14 years in technology and brand protection. He is an alum of University of Maryland College Park. At Aquis, he leads the organization in developing products and businesses to protect from counterfeiting and fraud. I'm the head of communications at FCPC Fraud and Counterfeit Protection Consortium. FCPC is an effort to bring together community of brands, government and technology and printing companies to defeat fraud and counterfeiting in the physical and digital world. Vikas from Aquis Technologies today provides brand protection to more than 90 organizations and has protected close to 100 million products. Vikas will be moderating the session today. Over to Vikas so that he can introduce our guest for today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Siddharth. Today we have with us Dr. Karthik Ananatharaman. He's a doctor turned management professional. He's an experienced healthcare professional with sales and marketing background in e-pharmacy, Biopharma and Medtech. Dr. Karthik is an alum of Yale University, Manipal University, and he completed his MBBS from Bangalore Medical College. Dr. Karthik, I think, is the best person to discuss counterfeiting in pharma, given his background both in medicine and on the industry side as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Karthik, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Vikas, for having over. My pleasure.
So counterfeiting in pharma, claim lives of at least quarter million children a year, right? And that's a breathtaking stat over there. Up to 10% of drugs in low and middle income countries are poor quality or outright fakes, costing local economies more than $10 billion to $200 billion a year. And that's what most of the reports are state. And I think this is definitely getting worse, right? So today we'll be discussing this exact problem with Dr. Karthik and understanding how counterfeiting has imprinted into the supply chain of pharma industry and how it can be prevented. So first question to you, Dr. Karthik, would be if you could help our viewers understand what's the life cycle of a pharmaceutical drug.
Sure. So as all of us know, when it comes to the relevance of counterfeiting, maybe I would like to start from that. From in terms of relevance of counterfeiting, I think the relevance is felt even more for novel drugs, especially the novel innovative drugs that come into the market. It is felt even more when it comes to injectables, which includes biologics, etc., and life-saving drugs. And I think even before I go into the larger nuance of the impact on pharma industry, I would possibly want to bring in something of absolute current relevance. Okay. So when we were to talk about certain life-saving injectable medicines that have been approved to manage severe COVID-19 infections, could be remdesivir, could be tocilizumab, right? And also in terms of, I would say, managing the pandemic itself, one of the critical aspect of what we call SMS, which is sanitization, social distancing, and mask, as we call. Okay. There is a significant amount of counterfeiting that we already see in masks, which are possibly the most relevant, tool that we have to protect ourselves from spreading infection to others and acquiring infections from others. Right. Second, when it comes to these injectables like remdesivir, when it comes to injectables like tocilizumab, dexamethasone, HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, etc., which are actually very relevant in managing the pandemic and making sure that public health is impacted in a positive way. We do see that there are quite a few gaps that are there in the overall supply chain, which allow multiple players to kind of question the quality of products that become available from time to time, right? So therefore, I think broadly speaking, the relevance of counterfeit becomes more and more pertinent with novel drugs, innovative drugs, which are considered to be a little more expensive, injectable drugs, biologics, and now in the context of COVID, I think in terms of the protection masks,
Okay.
as well as some of the life-saving medicines as such. But
Got it.
coming back to your main question in terms of, I think, life cycle, what we typically see is that counterfeiting generally is seen in the maturity phase of a product. So typically, as we go through product life cycle, which is common for not just pharma but any other industry, so
Right.
there is early adoption, and then there are these post the early adoption, you see the first set of people, the trialists that would come in, and after
Right.
the trialists would actually be the advocacy that a group that gets built in, and eventually there is a plateau phase where it
Okay.
becomes more like a standard of care. So
Makes sense.
typically we see that the inroad that counterfeit start making is typically in the growth phase, which is typically the adoption and the advocacy phase, is where we see that this kind of starts making its first inroad. And therefore, if we are able to address the issue at its roots itself, so if there are I would say preventive measures that can be taken right from the launch phase of such novel products, which are more akin to or more subjected to counterfeiting, I think that helps prevent counterfeiting to a great extent.
Great, great. Okay. So you spoke about COVID and how COVID has exacerbated this problem, right?
Yes,
And if you talk about masks, right, a lot of people are not even aware that FDA doesn't allow an FDA logo to be on a mask, right? And
that's true.
so in terms of compliance, what do you think? Like FDA, and there are a lot of other various compliances like NIOSH, like masks need to have a NIOSH certificate to be called N95, right? So what are
That's
the
correct.
various compliances the pharma brand need to have in place to ensure that the brands or the medicines they are selling are actually genuine, or a consumer is able to know it's a genuine medicine?
So naturally, any pharma drug, in most instances, if it's of course, if it's a off-patent established standard of care, generally the local regulators do not mandate a local clinical trial. So they
Okay.
would go with established data either from the EU or from the US or even from Japan, SFDA, or even Australia, ANZ certifications. But for novel drugs, in most cases, the local regulatory, if we were to call DCGI, typically would look for a local registration clinical trial
Okay.
with a specific number of patient sample size, which is statistically significant, and that particular clinical trial data gets submitted to the regulator seeking a marketing approval from the regulator.
Okay.
So I think making sure that the data authenticity of that clinical trial being maintained properly, being audited properly, and
Okay.
making sure that at the point of approval itself,
Right.
within the approval, if we can have an SOP that mandates various preventive steps that can be taken to avoid counterfeiting of such novel products, it will, I
Right.
think, go a long way in putting, a kind of at least halting or slowing down the
Right.
instances of counterfeiting. So I
Okay.
think addressing it from the root is always preferred. Yeah.
Makes sense. So you did touch upon briefly about how counterfeiters are able to actually, penetrate the supply chain. I think probably time to talk and help everyone understand and describe exactly which part of the supply chain do you think counterfeiters are actually able to penetrate and feed in or insert fake medicines?
Correct. I think naturally when we look at broadly pharma, and let's talk from the Indian context now. Broadly in pharma, you see that there are broadly three kinds of businesses or supplies that happen.
Right.
One supply is what we call the trade supply, which typically goes into the chemists, the pharmacies, the regular trade supply as we call. The second
Okay.
is what we call as enterprise supplies. Typically, it goes into large corporate chains of institutions.
Right.
And the third is basically public supply, mostly, I mean, specifically the government institutions, or the public institutions, as we call healthcare institutions.
Okay.
And
Okay.
even within that, naturally, we have now the, what we call as the Jan Aushadhi pharma, which actually provides access to medicines at very competitive and I would say affordable prices to people. So all
Right.
of this is actually marked in a specific label.
Okay.
There is a specific NPPA labeling that happens for special supplies that happens to government under Jan Aushadhi, and
Right.
also there are institutional supplies that happen in public sector to
Right.
specific institutions at pre-agreed prices. And in such instances, on the label of the product itself, it
Okay.
is clearly mentioned that this stock is specially made for this particular institution.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
by regulation, this is supposed to be in what we call as indelible ink, or there is a way to kind of make sure that this is something that is indelible, cannot be removed, so that you are able to clearly establish identity, you are able to clearly establish source, which is basically source of manufacturing, and also the destination or the final institution for which it is meant. Okay. But what we see is that there are several gaps in this system. The gaps are more pronounced in primary care, which is more, I would say, the diabetes, the cardiology, the dyslipidemia portfolio. You see gaps in that particular scenario, both in the oral formulations as well as in injectable formulations. Where we do see that in many instances, there are instances where what is supplied into specific institutions eventually sometimes ends up in trade as well, which causes significant disruptions within logistics and significant disruptions in, I would say, the way how sales numbers get recognized and reported as well, right? And secondly, the price to a public institution, the price to a corporate institution, and the price in trade are generally different from each other. Hence, it also, any such intermingling of stocks between the three types of supplies also brings in significant confusion and disparity in revenue recognition, and a significant amount of heartburn amongst pharma partners like distributors and stockists as well, because somebody stands to gain at the cost of somebody else, which is not right in terms of business ethics. So these are some of the things we see as gaps in the system, which again, I think stems back to the fact of what we were previously discussing, that yes, there are opportunities to plug these at the root itself, provided the solution that we use is something that can't be copied or manipulated easily by people.
Yes. So you spoke about gaps in the supply chain, and you also spoke about how unethical interjecting fake medicines is in the supply chain, right? So in terms of dangers to the end user, right, to the patients, what do you think are the dangers of consuming counterfeit medicines?
Well, I think it's anybody's guess. So, what do you think are the dangers of consuming a counterfeit mineral water? So we know it can start from anything like vomiting to loose motion to anything else, right? So I think it's the same. At the end of the day, the more critical the medicine or the more life-saving the medicine is, more acute the problem is, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there is, when we talk about medical ethics, at the end of the day, if a medicine is not able to save that person's life, and in turn actually brings in a new, kind of organ failure, which eventually leads to death or it's fatal, I think that defies the very purpose of what what doctors take as the Hippocratic oath, right? So I think coming back to the common thing, I think the more life-saving the medicine is, it may lead to several types of end organ damage. Typically, we see that counterfeit medicines, especially injectables, there have been instances of them leading to liver failure, kidney failure, those kind of organ failures as well, which is not good. There are some instances which I've seen in the past where there is actually physically visible particulate matter in a vial. And this is typically what we see in injectables, sometimes in biologics, etc. Sometimes an injection which is supposed to be clean and clear liquid is found to be turbid or cloudy or milky in color. Sometimes we see that, especially when you're using a device, when the medicine needs to be inserted into a drug delivery device and then administered to a patient. The quality of the cork which is there at the opening of the cartridge or the vial also matters a lot. And we do see that there are several instances where proper techniques are not being followed by people that bring in counterfeit or copy versions of these medicines into the market. And last but not the least, cold chain. I think there is a significant gap that we see in cold chain across the country in various sectors. And cold chain is extremely critical to maintain the efficacy of the drug through and through until it is actually administered to the patient. So we see that cold chain gaps are seen significantly across various sectors. Especially even in oral formulations, it is very clear that they have to be maintained at an ambient temperature less than 25 degrees without direct exposure to sunlight. And with cold chain, of course, it needs to be maintained between 2 and 8 degrees. Proper transport conditions being maintained when it is moved from one stockist to another, one pharmacy to another. And cold chain maintained until it is eventually, kept in the refrigerator at a patient's house and eventually it is getting administered to a patient. So I think there are significant gaps in this entire, logistic chain, if you call it as, which is even augmented when it comes to counterfeit, because we have seen that in many counterfeit, the label itself is missing.
Makes sense.
Storage conditions are missing. So therefore, these are some of the things to be very, you should have a very watchful eye to be able to decipher which one is original and which one is not. And I think that's where very clear regulations, both patient education is very important. I think empowering people to be able to see what is right and what is not is very, very important. I see the role of both pharma companies and online pharmacies there, because now you have access, whether it's on your phone app, smartphone app, or whether it's on a website, on a computer. If you're able to go type out the brand name of the medicine, the strength, and you're able to get to see the picture of the original packing, and you can actually turn it around 360 degrees, see exactly every aspect of the carton, every aspect of the product label, check what are the right contents to be present in that label, and how to decipher, that all the right regulatory and statutory compliances are actually mentioned on the label. I think empowering people to be able to check on data and ascertain whether it is the right one or not is very, very important.
Makes sense. So you spoke about empowering people, right? But do you think in a country like India, how difficult or how easy would it be to actually do that? And what are the various steps which a brand can take to ensure that consumers are able to buy genuine drugs and not fake drugs?
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of, I would say, industry, academia, and media as well, right? So because we would not want media to be picking up that somebody got administered a counterfeit drug and the person died, right? Now, at the end of the day, who takes the blame? It's the hospital and possibly the poor doctor. The doctor meant that the patient had to get cured, but unfortunately, for no fault of the doctor, if the medicine that was supplied was fake and nobody was able to find it out on time, you may lose the patient, which is actually very wrong, right? So at the end of the day, we're talking about saving someone's life. So therefore, my suggestion is that there are very simple and easy ways to do it. And I think the penetration of internet and the penetration of smartphones in our country is pretty decent, I would say. It may not be as in terms of overall population size in relative terms, the penetration may still be smaller compared to some of the European countries or the North American countries. But still in relative terms, at least in the tier 1 and the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, we do see that including the senior citizens, as we call, the penetration of smartphone is definitely there. And people do use social media these days, right? I think people of all age groups are now pretty active across Instagrams and Facebook and LinkedIn, and therefore I think using social media to educate people, and with something like as simple as a QR code, where if every original product can come up with a simple QR code, and and that QR code is able to determine how to differentiate between original versus a non-original product, I think it helps very well. And I can also bring you a case in point, because this happened in the early part of the pandemic, around late March, early April, mid-April, where there was a huge need for the 3-ply surgical mask. I still remember this instance. There were multiple different types of 3-ply surgical masks that flooded the market during that time. And it was very, very important to determine which is the original 3-ply and which is not the original 3-ply. And for that, there was a very simple test that was made. You actually cut the mask on the side. There have to be 3 layers in a 3-ply mask. The middle layer is the filter, and you pull out that filter and you actually burn it over a candle. Okay. Now, that is something, the heat blown, 3-ply mask is something that is considered to be good. It actually melts like a wax. Okay, and the one that is not original kind of burns out like paper. Right. And there was a very interesting YouTube video which was made to actually show how to differentiate and how to test for original versus duplicate. There is no QR code here. There is nothing that you can put on a mask. Right. I think using audiovisual media, YouTube, social media is a great way to actually make some of these content viral, because people would certainly want to know, like something like this. And the second important thing, this is possibly more of a public-private partnership or an industry and government partnership, is to look at consumer rights, right? So today, I think the way how we understand consumer rights in this country is only when someone is significantly at a financial loss, they would file something at the consumer court. But otherwise, generally, people like you and me would not want to go, and seek a legal route of solutioning for small losses that we incur because of consumer, product quality related issues. But yes, if that is an aspect that can actually come in into, I would say, a stronger limelight, where as an industry and government collaborated effort, if there can be a strong platform created, where we are able to bring in education and awareness about consumer rights, and within that create these education platforms of being able to identify original versus duplicate products, I think it will be very, very helpful and useful.
Makes sense. So talking about public-private partnerships, so I know in the agriculture industry, government has made it mandatory to have some kind of a traceability element on the packaging, right? So,
Correct.
and I think for exports in pharma also that is being implemented, right? So that has been
Correct.
implemented. So
That's
how
correct.
successful has that been, and do you think that is actually making a difference? And do you think that will also be implemented for the domestic market?
I think so. I think so. Since there's already a precedence being set in, I think it makes a lot of sense for it to be instituted across the pharma industry as well. So naturally, there is a way to actually trace the batch number, the lot number very clearly, and naturally, the tracing of batch number and lot number is very critical also to say, because these are unique numbers, right? So these are unique identifiable numbers. So if there is a duplication in the batch or the lot number, it immediately indicates towards a fake product, because it is very clear that you're able to determine, as long as a batch or a lot is actually being billed and consumed. Of course, we may not be tracking tertiary sales data as yet, but even at a secondary sales data, if we are able to at a stockist level see that yes, it's been billed and consumed and has moved into the tertiary segment, that is into the chemist or the pharmacist segment of the entire logistic chain, it is a good enough indicator to say that any new product which is coming at a CFA or at a distributor level of the repeated batch number is a potential duplicate product. Right. But yes, from a company's side, I think it is important. When I say company, from a manufacturer side, I'm saying it is important that there are, as we know, several technology solutions, very cost effective, simple, but almost difficult to replicate type of technology solutions available. There are some people who are making small stamp size or maybe lesser than stamp size kind of a sticker, which is unique, and it can actually be pasted on every SKU. And it is non-replicable. It's not easily replicable, I will put it that way. And of course, like how we discussed, there are some people who have the QR code kind of technology. And so 3M, in fact, comes up with 3M being amongst the gold standards in N95 masks across the world, as we know. They have come up with a unique thing. So on every 3M, carton of the mask, you will see that there is a QR code, which if you actually scan, it has two things in it. One, it actually allows you to trace back the global lot number and the batch number, which cannot be replicated easily. And second, it also shows a video, an educational video about how to differentiate an original 3M mask versus a duplicate 3M masks. And also within the mask, they have made specific indications to determine original versus duplicate as well. So therefore, it also, I think, there is certainly a great deal of responsibility that rests with the manufacturer also in bringing about, I think, some of these awareness initiatives.
Makes sense. From the manufacturer perspective, how do you think counterfeiting affects manufacturers or brands' business? Apart from, of course, I know it's going to affect the revenues, the profits, but there's a bigger effect in terms of the brand itself, right? So
absolutely. Absolutely. There is one example I may want to kind of explain this with, so there are certainly for some of the very popular drugs which are manufactured in large volumes, it is very normal in the industry for the original company to take help from third-party manufacturers to kind of meet the additional demand or of volumes of production for that particular product. Okay, so without making any reference to a specific brand, so we know that this is an industry norm and it's very common in the industry. What we do have seen in some instances is that, the brand which the original manufacturer is making is available in the market with almost a similar looking label, okay, at much lesser cost.
Okay.
Now, where does the leakage happen? Why does the leakage happen? There could be multiple elements to it. So therefore,
Okay.
I think it is critical that, as a manufacturer, as an original manufacturer, whether the manufacturer is making it in their own factory or whether they are outsourcing the manufacturing operations to a third-party manufacturer in a partnered format, it is very important to legally bind such relationships against counterfeiting specifically, and whatever are the anti-counterfeiting technology-based measures that the original manufacturer is instituting in their factory, the same should also be replicated in the outsourced third-party manufacturing factory as well,
Okay.
right? And there have to be, the most important thing is, I think, in any market, not just, I would say, our country, I would say any market where the chances of counterfeiting is very high,
Right.
or I would say the cost of counterfeiting is very high,
Right.
unless and until we very clearly define the penalty for deviation. And we
Right.
have some specific instances of people actually paying the penalty or being actually facing the consequences of a deviation from, I would say, anti-counterfeit type of a law. Until we enforce that law, and there are a few defaulters who actually get the justice handed over in the right way to such
Right.
people, it is very difficult for people to take some of these things seriously,
Makes sense.
right? So only when it is enforced and there are stringent actions taken against defaulters is when it kind of sets the right precedence.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So in terms of you mentioned about leaks happening when when probably medicine is outsourced for manufacturing outsourced, right? Is there a particular part of the supply chain where it's highly concentrated and where it's very likely to be counterfeited?
What we see is that there could be multiple. So it's very hard to say which one is more important or which one is possibly the most risky versus least risky. Yeah, if we
Got
were
it.
to possibly classify, it's hard to say that.
Okay.
But yes, it is. As I told you, it could be at source, especially if it's an outsourced manufacturing, facility. Okay,
Right.
that is one possibility. I'm not saying it's happening everywhere, but it's one possibility. Second, what we commonly hear and what we commonly see is at the distribution end,
Okay.
right? So therefore, what happens is that when it goes from the distributor to the stockist, and from stockist to the chemist, right? So basically, what happens is, there again we see that there are multiple exchange of hands. It happens. So
Okay.
this typically happens in the primary care businesses more often than not,
Okay.
where in addition to the company authorized distributors or stockists, there are multiple sub stockists and freelancers who work in terms of liquidating the stock that these people take, right? So
Okay.
therefore, it exchanges multiple hands there, right? So once
Right.
it goes out of the company authorized distribution system, the
Okay.
company kind of loses track. It's very difficult to track in whose hand the stock actually went to, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
finally, once it reaches the sub stockist or the what you say, the freelancer, we see that there are multiple opportunities there as well for potentially some of these things happening as well in the market. And how you actually get to know, or what are the early indicators of this, is
Okay.
that when your secondary sales and primary sales don't match to each other in specific territories, which is something that I think pharma managers will be very keenly observing. You get to know that there are specific markets where there are a potential opportunity of counterfeit actually happening. So
Makes sense.
therefore, it is very important to keep our eyes and ears closer to the ground at all times. So it's important to identify these risks early, because if
Right.
early stringent actions are not taken,
Right.
then controlling this menace becomes extremely difficult. And
Makes sense.
at the end of the day, who suffers? It is not the counterfeit manufacturer who suffers. The one who is manufacturing is not putting his manufacturing name there, he's putting the original manufacturer's name there. So the original
Right.
manufacturer's brand reputation is on the line, and
Right.
hence it is very, very important that to maintain the brand value, the brand reputation, and most importantly, to prevent a undesirable side effect or an undesirable fatality or death in a patient
True.
which is taking this medicine on which label the original manufacturer's name is mentioned. I think
Right.
the damage that it causes and the legal suits that may come out of it is something that is totally avoidable.
Makes sense. Makes sense. You've had a good amount of experience in e-pharma side of the business as well, right? So do you think e-pharma is going to make it more difficult to prevent counterfeiting, or you think it's going to help actually make it easier to actually take steps to prevent counterfeiting?
I see a great opportunity where e-health and e-pharma can actually be a very strong mechanism of preventing counterfeiting. So, as I told you, e-pharma makes access possible for everyone to kind of access medicines across the country, whether it's tier one, tier two, tier three market, irrespective of that.
Right.
E-pharma companies, when they are unable to deliver medicines to a particular pin code physically through a delivery boy, they always deliver it through couriers. It
Right.
may take maybe a day or two extra to reach, but it reaches. So therefore, last mile access is something that e-pharmacies significantly enhance. But that
Right.
being said, yes, as I was mentioning a little while ago, simple forms of digital education,
Right.
that putting the complete picture of the product in
Right.
all angles, right? And also giving the right information, education, and guidance on what are the key things to look for in the original packing, right?
Right.
And how to differentiate between original and duplicate, both in the, I would say, picture based format and in an audiovisual format as well, is something where e-pharmacies can actually play a huge role, because
Right.
naturally all these companies have very good websites and apps with very pertinent content. And I think content driven education and content driven awareness creation can be hugely leveraged there. Second, e-pharma is a B2C business. So naturally, they are talking directly to patients, and their presence in social media, their ability to do digital, marketing, their ability to do content-driven marketing, SEO, and blog-based marketing is substantially much better.
True.
Pharma companies, by guidelines, by law, by compliance, cannot do direct-to-patient marketing. They can
Okay.
only talk about therapeutic area, but they can't promote their medicines to patients by law.
Right.
However, e-pharma are not pharma companies by themselves. They are
Right.
only conduits to making the medicine reach a final patient. Therefore, e-pharmacies are allowed to talk to a patient. Of course, e-pharmacies cannot do promotion on pharma brands, but
Right.
e-pharmacy can certainly reach the customers and do education, a general education, non-branded education about differentiating between original versus duplicate. I think
Right.
e-pharma can very well be leveraged using these technologies.
Great, great. And I think e-pharma would help also in removing a lot of these additional elements in the supply chain where
Correct.
quantification is
Yeah,
definitely used, right? Great. So
absolutely.
in terms of government, I mean, I understand government is doing mandating serialization of drugs, medicines. What else? What else? What other steps do you think the government is taking in preventing counterfeits?
I think what the government, and actually there are certain manufacturing facilities as well which the government runs of its own as well. So, and second, we spoke about Jan Aushadhi, and third, I think we also spoke about, there is the serialization which they have been bringing in, right, across the agricultural sector, etc. I think bringing some of these into the through the ministry that governs pharmaceutical and medtech manufacturing together, as we
Right.
call, is extremely beneficial, extremely helpful. And naturally, if it is mandated, and as I told you, if it's a concerted effort between public sector and private sector together, that makes it that much more meaningful, and it brings in that level of, I think, agility and importance to fighting counterfeiting, as we call it as. So
Okay.
definitely that is the right move. But again, all of this is only theoretical if there
Right.
are no penalties very clearly defined, and if we actually in reality execute that penalty against defaulters.
Makes
Setting
sense.
that example of somebody actually undergoing some kind of a punishment for deviation, until that example is set in real life, none of this is taken seriously. So that is also very, very important.
Great.
Enforcing the law is very important.
Great, great. So why do you think pharma companies have? I'm sure there are a lot of things which are being done, but why do you think pharma companies have found it difficult to actually implement anti-counterfeiting measures? Is it because of cost, or is it because of the additional steps required to educate the consumers, etc.?
Well, I think I think until recently, the technology leverage in pharma and in pharma manufacturing was something that was known to few people,
Okay.
and I think it's a gradual process that pharma kind of picks up some of these anti-counterfeiting measures, and
Okay.
and tries to see how best to leverage some of these technologies. So what I have seen is that I think technology companies, specifically companies manufacturing spare parts, or original companies where they have to maintain their machines or devices for a long period of time, by kind of making sure that they supply original spare parts during the entire management of the life cycle of a product. Those are companies that have realized the true value of anti-counterfeiting technologies and measures early on, because as we know, the customer buying life cycle is a little different between medical devices and pharma. In medical devices, once you sell a machine, the customer continues to own that machine for 5 years, 6 years, sometimes even 10 years. If it's a CT scan and MRI scan, at least they own it for 10 to 12 years before they change over. So therefore, what maintains the relationship for these medtech companies during that period of ownership of that machine is the quality of service, the timeliness of service, and naturally the quality of service is dependent almost completely on the quality of the spare parts that they would go and replace during the service. And this is the same learning in automotive industry as well, right? So where to maintain that relationship with the customer and for the customer to come back and upgrade his car to the next level car of the same brand, the satisfaction of the customer with the current car in the current brand is very, very important. And there, the spare part quality, service quality plays a significant role. And that's where I've seen that medical devices industry and technology industry, IT, especially hardware components in IT, have realized this very well. And they have actually adapted some of these anti-counterfeiting technologies early on. Now, when it comes to pharma, pharma broadly, we can call it as acute, subchronic, and chronic, in terms of the way how it is designed. Now, in acute, you would take the medicine once, symptoms disappear, person gets cured, you would take it only later. So the chances of counterfeiting leading to some kind of an adverse event may be less felt in relative terms in acute care or acute therapies. Whereas in chronic, you are taking the same medicine, same brand of the medicine, almost for lifelong or for a very long period of time. And that's where the adverse effects or the wrong effects of counterfeit is felt the most. And hence, I would certainly foresee that companies who specialize more in chronic medicines, and within that, as I already qualified earlier, more the injectables, biologics, and the drug delivery device. I think there is a lot of counterfeiting in the delivery device also, especially when it comes to syringes, when it comes to cannula, when it comes to intravenous sets, when it comes to the IV sets, right? Catheters, etc. I think the medical consumables industry is a huge threat of counterfeit as well. And therefore, gradually moving from core medtech to medical consumables, and then eventually coming to the biologics and injectable part of pharma, and then the oral part of pharma is like a natural progression that I foresee in terms of how this will get adopted.
Got it. Okay. So you spoke about injectables. So some of the consumers of these injectables and chronic devices would also be doctors who will be administering these medicines to the end patient, right? So do the doctors are aware of this problem, are able to identify fakes versus genuine? Or do you think doctors are finding it difficult and
I don't think there has been a formal awareness creation work or educational work that has ever happened either for doctors or paramedics. But you are absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head. The very first step, I think, would be to address the medical professionals and the paramedical professionals, especially nurses. The reason why I say this is, see, when it comes to using medical consumables, starting from a glove to an intravenous set, to a cannula, to an IV set, infusion sets, etc. It is the nurse who actually does all this in a hospital setting, right? So if the nurse, the paramedic, and we call it as catch them young, right? Starting from a nursing college to societies of nursing, school of nursing, etc., going on to, I would say medical societies, physician societies, etc. If awareness can be built through in partnership and collaboration with societies, associations, and with medical colleges where the upcoming nursing staff and medical staff are actually being trained, that will create, I would say, a more, solid effort in making sure that the target population is trained enough to be able to understand the nuances of differentiating between original versus the non-original product. So I would look at it in that way, yeah.
Okay. Have you seen any effort being done on that end where either government or pharma companies are actually trying to educate, like you said, catch them young, right? Educate them when they're actually in colleges?
Yes. I have seen effort in terms of delivery techniques training, right? So the right way of injection, the wrong way of injection, which should be avoided.
Okay.
Uh, and therefore, what is the right way to insert? I think the most of the efforts what I've seen are procedural in nature
Okay.
and use case training in nature. I have
Right.
personally seen any large effort, large scale effort, and most important here is consistency. You may
Right.
always do one or two webinars or one or two hands-on training, etc. But that doesn't serve the purpose. This has to be a consistent effort, right? It has to be a repetitive effort. And for
Right.
all you know, you don't have to do a dedicated anti-counterfeiting training anywhere. If anti-counterfeiting could be just one small topic, but one critical topic that could be discussed towards the end of every symposium, towards the
Right.
end of every paramedic or medical education program, that is good enough. People get sensitized with that, right?
Right.
So therefore, if that can be instituted, I haven't seen that effort begin as yet, but I do
Okay.
see that there is an opportunity to do something of that nature.
Okay. Okay. And do you think would it be actually better for the industry to take it up, or should the government be in a right position to actually do that?
It's a chicken or the egg. I would just say that the person to whom it matters the most should actually
Oh,
take a proactive effort to do it. And to whom does it matter? In my mind, every company who's manufacturing a life-saving biologic, injectable device, medical consumable, who would not want to risk their brand or brand value, and most importantly, brand value comes next. Who would not want to risk the life of a patient to whom they want to make a difference? I think they
right.
should take up that effort.
Great, great. So, do you think a lot of imports that come into India actually are also fall prey to counterfeiting, or is just mainly domestic manufacturing that happens?
Yes, there is a lot of counterfeit that comes into India. Yes,
Okay,
for
okay,
sure, uh, and it happens more so in. I would not. I don't have the experience of seeing this in pharma finished formulation, so I would
okay,
not comment on that. But
okay,
yes, I am aware that it does happen in medical consumables and in medical devices and in spare parts,
okay,
and I've seen some specific examples there. So
okay,
therefore, it's a great point, absolutely the right point you brought up.
okay,
Yes, similar to, I think, bringing in these control measures within for, I would say, domestic manufacturers.
right,
If at the entry points, I think at customs clearance itself, if there are specific things that can be instituted in actually screening for original versus non-original, that will be, I think, a great step that can be taken. I'm not sure if any country has been doing it,
right.
for their imports. I'm not aware of such examples, but if that can be done, it's a great use case, as I see. Yeah.
I think we're doing it for exports. I think it's probably right time to actually implement it for imports as well, right?
Correct. But I can tell you for sure that there are some specific, I would say, prevention measures that have been taken by some of the standard manufacturers. So
Okay,
typically, what they do is before the consignment leaves the original manufacturing country to the importing country, there
right,
are companies like UL, SGS, TUV Rainland, etc. The large regulators, they do have an arm which is actually looking into, I would say, authentication of stock, as we call. So they do a stock verification and certification. And these are
right,
very standard companies. So
right,
naturally, having the stock verified physically at point of manufacturing before it actually gets shipped out of that country, and
right,
making sure that authenticity of originality of the stock is certified by such companies will
okay.
certainly bring in that level of control. When large scale import happens for expensive products.
Makes sense. And talking about age-specific drugs, like do you think this problem is more prominent in drugs meant for young and children, or do you think it's more prominent in drugs meant for the senior citizens, or something in between?
Well, so as we see, I think it depends on what is the expected damage or side effect that a
Okay,
certain counterfeit medicine may cause, right?
okay,
Naturally, yeah, medical logic wise, if you see extremes of age, young children and senior citizens have lesser immunity, so the
okay,
body's ability to fight against any kind of an adverse event is lesser. The
okay,
strength of the immune system is in relative terms lesser, and hence it is quite likely that they end up having more serious consequences. But it
right,
doesn't mean that the age group of 18 to 50 or 18 to 60 is not at the same risk. So it depends on the level of, there are some instances, as I was briefly telling earlier, where there is suspended particulate matter, which has been noted. So therefore, I think very important, to basically say that, irrespective of age group, it is important to prevent it. Side effect of this could happen to anyone. But yes, it may be more pronounced in the extremes of age for the reasons I cited.
Makes sense. And I've read a lot of baby formulas also getting counterfeited. That.
By the way, this is a new thing that at least I have been hearing in the recent past, because nutrition is one area which is picking up significantly. Yes. Right, and nutrition, while traditionally we know as supplemental nutrition was meant for children, right? But there are specific clinical conditions where nutrition is very critical for life, and it actually helps in recovery. It helps in healing. One is actually kidney disease, where nephronutrition is a specialized science. Another one is onconutrition, where nutrition in cancer patients, immunocompromised patient, is a specialized science in itself. And it is seen that when these products are, administered to patients, in addition to ongoing pharmacotherapy, as we call it, substantially fast tracks or facilitates healing. And we are seeing that in such nutrition products, there is quite a bit of counterfeiting that has started. Okay. And so that is a worrying thing, because all these conditions I mentioned, whether it is nutrition in children, we are referring to a very sensitive age group, or nutrition related to patients with kidney disease who may be on dialysis, or nutrition in cancer patients or immunocompromised patients, which is like a terminally ill disease. All these are critical to life kind of conditions. So therefore, avoiding counterfeiting in such products is very, very important. So I think this is one trend which should be kind of put to rest immediately. Yeah.
Definitely makes sense. I think even your generic protein supplements are also seeing a lot of counterfeiting. Your bodybuilding protein supplements are also seeing a lot of counterfeiting.
Yes.
So not to put you in a spot, but which brand do you think is actually leading? Which brands do you think are actually leading efforts in preventing counterfeiting, or actually doing a lot of implementations of various technologies to actually prevent counterfeiting?
Well, I would not be able to specifically tell you about pharma examples, but I'm sure the pharma as an industry is going through that curve, and I'm sure most of the leading manufacturers, both from other countries and from India, are making a conscious effort. I do see that very soon, maybe many of these manufacturers may institute some of these technologies. But I can tell you that, globally, if you ask for one name, the top of mind I recollect is 3M. I think what 3M has been able to do worldwide in being able to kind of provide the right kind of tools, education, both to starting from its master distributors to sub-distributors to stockists, and also to kind of make sure that everyone has a fair idea of being able to determine an original 3M versus a non-original 3M product, I think is a commendable job. So they were amongst the first in my mind to kind of use technology to fight counterfeiting. But I'm sure that trend continues across industries. As I mentioned to you, the medical technology industry has taken it up. So some of the large companies, which we are all aware, have already started instituting it for their spare parts, and also across medical consumables we see. I think the biggest names there is a company called Ambu, which all of us might have heard. So Ambu and King Systems. So they have a huge number of medical consumables, especially in anesthesia, drug device delivery, airway respirator systems, etc. So I think these are some of the top companies that have instituted it long back. And I'm sure pharma companies globally will follow suit very quickly. There are quite a few, I'm sure, who may be evaluating it.
Okay, really nice. That's nice to know. So I know you already, we touched upon this point about what are the various, technologies and solutions available. But if you have to summarize, and if you have to pick, let's say the best two and the easiest two to actually implement, what are the two solutions in your mind do you think which companies can look at in terms of implementing to prevent counterfeiting?
Yeah, I think in my mind, the thumb rule that anyone can kind of use is any technology which is easily understandable and usable by a common man, right, should be the right technology to institute. There are some which are very manufacturing role specific. Only somebody who's from a manufacturing expertise or a domain may understand how to you kind of institute it, operationalize it. But at the end of the day, when it reaches the hand of the final customer, if the customer is unable to comprehend it and determine what is original or what is not, then I think it defies the very purpose. So it kind of limits its utility only to a certain section of the manufacturing I would say community. But something like how we discussed the QR code part of it, and within the QR code there are multiple facets, multiple data points that one can look at by just scanning that QR code. I think creating anything which is very end customer facing and is easily usable and can easily be utilized by the end customer, that is what makes it very relevant and practical also.
Makes sense. Europe recently implemented, not recently, I think a year back, they implemented traceability up to the chemist, right from the manufacturing to the chemist, right? And I understand in India it's going to be a little difficult to implement. But do you think we should move towards that? Of course, I think it's a no-brainer. We should move towards that. But do you think the industry is moving towards that?
Yes, of course I do. I do see that there are quite a few companies who do very effective patient support programs, and patient support programs for all the right legal and compliance reasons are managed by third-party organizations, established third-party organizations. So naturally, I think patient support programs, if instituted well in a legal and in a compliant way, are a great way to also make sure that the final product that is reaching the medicine, be it a device, be it a product, be it a medicine, whatever it is, is actually going to kind of give the right benefit, because you can certainly use the patient support system as a great tool to fight counterfeiting. And patient support programs are very well established across medical device industry and across pharmaceutical industry as well. I think that's a great leverage that one can have.
Great. Okay. So I think we also mentioned that we'll be touching a little bit about brand building. So let's talk at least a few minutes on brand building assets. So, how does a pharma company go about building a brand and also ensuring that it's able to communicate rightly to the end consumers?
Yes,
I think it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think there are some pharma companies that have a unique, I would say, advantage of also having consumer-facing businesses, right? So naturally, I'm sure you know what the names are. So therefore, those companies that have a combination of, I would say, consumer healthcare businesses and, of course, the regular, I would say, formulation-based businesses will be able to leverage this in a nice way, in being able to say that, the same way how many of the non-medical industries would have established originality as their, I would say, DNA. I think having those kind of messages, which are, I would say, media-led, PR-led, like to the end consumer, talking about how, taking the original product gives the right benefit, and how, as a company, as a brand, they are very sensitive and cognizant to that fact. What kind of measures are they instituting that only the original product reaches the market, and they are making effort from their side to prevent potential counterfeiting in the market. I think those kind of direct-to-consumer measures always builds that brand trust, which is already there. And second thing is, for those companies which are actually B2B in nature, not really having a consumer-facing arm of their business, I think taking the distribution network into confidence is very critical, right? Now, so therefore, how do we make sure that the distributors, the stockists are kind of, brought into the business more as partners, and not just people who actually form a part of a logistic chain, right? So getting this level of sensitivity and education at the distributor level, at the stockist level, and even at a chemist level, because at the end of the day, which chemist would like to risk his name by stocking counterfeit medicine and dispensing counterfeit medicine from their counter? Nobody would want to do that, right? Because this spreads very easily through word of mouth, right? And I went to this chemist, I bought this, and I had this, and I found that it is counterfeit. People would kind of just have that shop shut, right? I mean, it's as stringent as that. So I think these are things where I would also call in for the AIOCD to play a very important role. It's the All India Association of Chemists and Druggists. So I definitely see AIOCD can play a leadership role in actually kind of coming forward proactively to fight counterfeiting, because at the end of the day, there are over 7 to 8 lakh chemists, in fact, even more. Some of the numbers do say there are 12 lakh registered pharmacies under the AIOCD, and that's a huge number to reach out to, and that's a huge impact that one can make if it's a collective AIOCD-led effort kind of thing. I think these are things that we should look for. Similarly, on the medical devices side, there is an organization called AIMED, Association of Medical Device Manufacturers, etc. AIMED has a great role to play in this as well. So those are some of the things that can be done.
Great. We have one question is from Vishal. Do you think the current COVID situation will escalate the presence of counterfeit products in market? You already touched upon it, but if you want to add.
Yes. It's already a reality. Already a reality, starting from masks to medicines to hydroxychloroquine to remdesivir to whatnot. So I think that's where again, the only solution is plug it at source.
Okay. Makes sense. Cool. I think we almost end of the session. We've completed I think all our questions as well. So it was really educational, and thank you so much, Dr. Karthik. I mean, it was really good to learn and understand how the industry is moving, and a lot of positives from it, that we are actually seeing a lot of effort being put in by pharma companies and the government to actually prevent counterfeits, right? And I think it's a very important topic as well, because counterfeiting affects the end consumer's life, the end patient's lives, and that could be life threatening.
Correct. Absolutely. And I think there is as all of us know, counterfeit medicine is possibly something that all of us should collectively fight against, right? At the end of the day, all of us who represent ourselves as peoples in the healthcare industry are here to actually make difference to the life of a patient, and wherever possible, save the life of a patient, who is in distress, who needs medical help. So if we are not staying true to the very purpose of why we are here in healthcare industry, then I think it is too demeaning to kind of, do any such thing. So therefore, I would always call in for a concerted effort of everyone, who has come into healthcare for the reason of making a difference to the life of patients, to kind of take cognizance of this and contribute their bit towards fighting the menace of counterfeiting. I truly enjoyed being a part of this conversation. Thank you so much again for having me over. So thank you so much, Vikas and team, for this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karthik. It was an absolute pleasure having you. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. Until next time, thank you so much and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.